Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert. I'm Sarita Gonzales, your worship associate today. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the historic homelands of various bands of the Cahuilla people, and we honor the unique relationship that we hope emerges between our community and the indigenous people and their traditional territories. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Cahuilla people whose land and water we benefit from today. Before we begin, we also want you to know that it doesn't matter where you or your ancestors are from, who you love, your gender identity, your theology, politics, or immigration status. We welcome all those who are committed to our core values as expressed in our 7 principles. Together, we come to this place with our hopes, dreams, and visions. We seek to build a diverse and inclusive community that honors our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Thank you for being with us this morning. Please consider making a donation with our virtual offering basket. Your contribution is an important way to support UUCOD and this morning's Share the Plate recipient, Martha's Village. Those of you watching on Zoom can just click on the link provided on our weekly constant contact order of worship that you received, or at the end of the service through an email link that you will also receive. If you would like to be on our mailing list to learn more about us and our programming, please contact us at admin@uucod.org. That's admin@uuc.org. And now we will ring our Tibetan bowl and begin our service, and then listen to our music for centering.
Good morning and welcome. However you found us, however many times you've been here with us in person or online, welcome. We are a congregation grounded in our commitment to love, and an evolving tradition that celebrates the richness and beauty of individual lives and commits to working together to weave a tapestry made stronger and more vibrant by our collaboration and by the sharing of our lives and our visions for a thriving, loving, and just future for all life. We begin this morning with the words of the Reverend Leslie Takahashi, adapting those old words by Rumi. Come, come whoever you are, come with your hurts, your imperfections, your places that feel raw and exposed. Come, come whoever you are, come with your strength that the world shudders to hold. Come with your wild imaginings of a better world. Come with your hopes it seems no one wants to hear. Wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, we will make a place for you. We will build a home together. Ours is no caravan of despair. We travel together. Come, yet again, come.
Please recite with me as we light our chalice, our unison aspiration. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament, and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration.
And now I invite you to join me in saying the words of our biopot candle lighting as Sarita lights the candles. We light these candles in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as they journey toward spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all prevail. Now we'll share in our opening hymn, which is the same as our closing hymn from last week, reminding us that the work that we do, all of the work we do, is to answer the call of love in our lives.
Hey! answering the call to love.
So I want to take a little time right now to talk with you a little bit about our 7 principles, the things that bring us together. And I want to share with you that one of the things that a minister does is teach people about our religious tradition. And so I was serving a congregation in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, Open Circle Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, as their student minister, and I was working with the youth group who were going through the coming of age program. And one day we were talking about our principles and sources of our tradition. And I had been getting a little frustrated, a little uncomfortable with our 7 principles as a list, because I think it made it feel like the first principle was the most important because it was number 1, and that more importantly than that, we kind of got stuck there. Got to the first principle and just didn't think about the others often. So one day I came up with the principles as a wheel, which you see in the picture. The first principle, which tells us about who we are as individuals, is in the center. And the 7th principle, which tells us about who we are as part of the interconnected web of existence, is on the outside. The other principles are spokes in the wheel, the way that we figure out how to live well with both of those things. Individuals are important, and we are a small part of something vast and interconnected and holy, and we live between those 2 things, and the other spokes help us with that. Now, my original version did not look like this. It was hand-drawn and scratchy. It had a couple of spelling mistakes, and I got one of the words wrong. I'm not going to tell you which one it was. A good friend of mine, Kimberly, a good friend who is a minister, took the scratchy thing that I had made and turned it into something beautiful, and I do love it. But you know, some of you may not remember, these were not always our principles. When the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America, those are the 2 churches that merged to form the UUA, came together as the Unitarian Universalist Association in 1961. That was before even I was born. After much arguing, leaders and delegates created a set of principles that described the way that the things that we had in common, the things that we agreed on. But they didn't look exactly like this. They were kind of dry. I'm not going to read them to you because I don't want. They had important ideas, but they might put you to sleep. And they also had language that we would probably now call pretty sexist. They talk about the ideals of brotherhood and the dignity of man. They talked about men of goodwill. And so, after much conversation, much of it sparked and challenged by the women in our denomination, in the early 1980s, a new set of principles was created that was pretty much what we have now. So even though my wheel of principles is pretty, I can't forget that things haven't always been this way. Our principles were never meant to be set and true for always. Built into them is the idea that we can change them. And we have before. Now, these days here, we are being asked to choose a new principle, which we're going to talk about later in the service, an 8th principle that asks us to make ending racism and oppression, hatred, asks us to make the work to end those things a real part of who we are, and asks us that we don't just talk about it, but do something. Now, my friend Kimberly and I are talking now about how we might change our beautiful wheel to make the 8th principle part of our design. But you know, it may not be possible. We may need to rethink the whole picture. And you know, I would be sad to lose my lovely picture, but it would also be wonderful to find a way to reimagine it so that we can live into our values and acknowledge a new way of thinking and being. I hope that that's something we can all do together.
As you all know, this is the 3rd Sunday of the month, and this is the Sunday that we dedicate to share the plate with our offertory. I want to introduce you to George Sinatra, who is the Senior Director of Development at Martha's Village, and he works out of the Indio location. He started working in nonprofits here in Coachella Valley after he left corporate America in 2012 and settled in his new hometown of Palm Springs. George says that Martha's Village has brought the most wonderful people into my life that inspires me daily to be the best that I can be and to make the desert the best place for anyone who calls Coachella Valley home. George goes on to say that every day I'm inspired by both my colleagues and those we serve. Please give generously.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank all of you here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert for welcoming me. I am George Sinatra. I am the Senior Director of Development at Martha's Village and Kitchen. I'm so excited to be here today, virtually, to tell you a little bit about what we do. It's really exciting because your values in action are very similar to what Martha's Village and Kitchen does throughout the entire Coachella Valley at all 4 of our locations. Here in India, where I am today, Mecca, Desert Hot Springs, and Palm Springs. You state that the inherent worth and dignity of every person counts, and that's exactly how we feel here at Martha's Village and Kitchen through our many, many programs and services. Right now, above me, upstairs, we have 131 residents living here and going through programs. The reason they go through these programs is so that we can teach them to fish, that we can help them, and we can lift them so they can rise. That's what it's all about here at Martha's Village and Kitchen. Right now, out of the 131 residents that we have, 68 of them are children under the age of 18 with their families. We accept everyone, individuals, families. Our youngest resident right now is 11 days old, and our oldest resident right now is 89 years old. We're here to help the community, and how we do that is by supplying them with the knowledge and tools through our wraparound case management employment services. We guarantee that when people enter here, they will be given health care, education, and job guidance. We're so thrilled that you have chosen Martha's Village and Kitchen to be one of your recipients at Pass the Plate. We have so many beautiful programs. I would love for you to come down sometime and see. We'd be happy to give you a tour. That's from our culinary program, our daycare, where we accept children 6 weeks of age to 5 years old. We're a licensed daycare and preschool. We're a California State licensed employment center at all locations. We provide over 280,000 meals a year to our residents and to the community. We have a daily pantry for those who are unsheltered, for those who do have access to a kitchen, and then for our infant and children pantry, where we supply diapers and pull-ups, wipes, baby food and formula for anyone in need. We accept all people, LGBT community, people of all races and religions. We are here to help them rise. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and I hope soon I'll be able to be there in person to answer any questions that you may have. I hope you all had a happy and healthy new year, and I hope that we all stay healthy in 2022. Thank you, everyone.
Sing in my heart all the
Fuente de amor, ven hacia mí y al corazón cántale tu compasión. Sopla a volar, sube la mar, hasta volver la justicia de la vida. Arriáigame, libérame, fuente de amor, ven a mí, ven a mí. Fuente de amor, ven a mí, ven a mí.
Did you know that the Coachella Valley is over 70% Hispanic? That's the term that the U.S. government uses for people who come from Latin America, all over Latin America, and who speak predominantly Spanish. So I'm going to give my reflection today both in English and Spanish. And I believe that if we build it, they will come. And we want to be inviting to all the residents of Coachella Valley. When I first became a Unitarian Universalist 25 years ago, the main attraction for me were the 7 principles. They were a set of ideals that I aspired towards. For this morning's service, I would like to share what our UU principles mean to me, and I suggest how the proposed 8th principle calls us to put all of our principles into action. Cuando me convertí por primera vez en una unitaria universalista hace 25 años, la atracción para mí eran los 7 principios. Eran ideales a los que yo aspiraba. Para el servicio de esta mañana, me gustaría compartir lo que significan para mí nuestros principios unitarios universalistas. Y sugiero como el 8º principio propuesto nos llama a poner todos nuestros principios en acción. Here's my vision of how our UU principles look in action. We, the member congregations of Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I think we endeavor to treat each other with love and compassion as valuable and worthy members of a beloved community. Aquí está mi versión de nuestros principios unitarios universalistas en acción. Nosotros, las congregaciones miembros de la Asociación Unitaria Universalista, convenimos en afirmar y fomentar el valor y la dignidad propia de cada persona. Nos esforzamos por tratarnos unos a otros con amor y compasión como miembros valiosos y dignos de una comunidad amada. The second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. We work towards fairness, inclusion, and belonging in all of our interactions. La justicia, equidad y compasión en las relaciones humanas. Trabajamos por equidad, inclusión y pertenencia en todas nuestras interacciones. Third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. We welcome and encourage and celebrate common values and different perspectives of spirituality. La aceptación del uno al otro y el estímulo al crecimiento espiritual en nuestras congregaciones. Invitamos, fomentamos y celebramos valores comunes y diferentes perspectivas de la espiritualidad. The fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We open ourselves to change and grow as human beings in our quest to strengthen our beloved community. Una búsqueda libre y responsable por la verdad y el sentido. Abrimos nuestros corazones al cambio y al crecimiento como seres humanos en nuestra búsqueda para fortalecer a nuestra amada comunidad. The fifth principle, the right of conscious and the use of the democratic process within our congregation and in society at large. We want to build structures and processes that are inclusive of diverse perspectives, and we seek to be an example for fairness. El derecho de la conciencia y el uso del proceso democrático dentro de nuestras congregaciones y en la sociedad en general. Queremos construir estructuras y procesos que incluyen diversas perspectivas y buscamos ser un ejemplo de equidad. Sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. We want to work to bring an end to injustice and harm to people and to be makers of peace through liberation. La meta de la comunidad mundial con paz, libertad y justicia para todos. Trabajamos para poner fin a la injusticia y el daño a las personas y ser constructores de paz a través de la liberación. Seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence which we are a part. We recognize that each and every one is the embodiment of the divine. El respeto por el tejido interdependiente de todo lo que existe, del cual somos una parte. Reconocemos que cada uno de los seres somos la encarnación de lo divino. And the eighth principle, which Reverend Ian will speak about more in detail today, journeying towards spiritual wholeness to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. We will work to end racism and oppression when we see it in ourselves, our community, and in the broader world to live out all of our principles. Asegurando la plenitud espiritual para construir una amada comunidad diversa y multicultural mediante nuestras acciones que desmantelen responsablemente el racismo y otras opresiones en nosotros y nuestras instituciones. Trabajamos para acabar con el racismo, la opresión cuando la vemos en nosotros mismos, en nuestra comunidad y en el mundo en general para vivir todos nuestros principios.
I made a little mistake in the order of service, and so we had this music section earlier. We're going to start on our joys and sorrows now. These are the joys and sorrows of this congregation, this community, today. We light a candle of, Bryna Bloom lights a candle of remembrance and says, this week marks the 25th anniversary of the passing of Chuck Bloom, the man, she says, who taught me how to love and taught me how to laugh. Another candle of remembrance from Joni for her dearest friend Carol, whose 74th birthday would have been yesterday. Joni says, gone just over 7 years now, but always in my heart. I miss her smile, her laugh, and her wisdom. We light a candle of health and healing for Sheila Goldner, who let us know last week that she had tested positive for COVID. She's been self-quarantining this week and doing very well. And another candle for all of those in our congregation who have tested positive and have been ill at home. You are in our hearts as you recover. And we light a candle today for the memory of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We share deep gratitude for the impact of his life's work and a conviction to hear his words, the words that made us uncomfortable as well as those that inspired, and to act in the world to build the beloved community for all. We light one final candle for all of those joys and sorrows that remain quiet in the silence of our own hearts, unspoken today, but present amongst us. May we all find peace and love and relief from our suffering. So I invite you now to join me in a time of prayer or contemplation. Be comfortable in your seat, arms resting in your lap. Breathe deeply through your nose into your core, breathing, centering yourself in this place. Whatever else is going on in our lives, we acknowledge today that this is a hard time. That though there is hope and community, that though there is connection and rebuilding, this is a hard time. The world has changed around and within us. The things we knew and trusted, many of them are not there or are in different forms. Even if we have not been touched by sickness ourselves, we are surrounded by a society, a community, families that are grappling with illness, grappling with death. We have been told to be apart from each other at a time when being together is so necessary. So this is a hard time. If you are feeling like it's just a hard time, you are not alone. You are not alone. And there is hope, we know. Hope that we will begin to manage this disease better so that we can live our lives together. Hope that we will find a way through and continue to grow and thrive together. As we feel that hope, we remember that we are not all equally impacted by this disease, this pandemic, or our response to it. That many, many, many of us, our neighbors and kin, are suffering from lack of access, lack of work, and from the deaths of families and friends. And so we hold in our hearts all of those who suffer these days. And we know that there is hope. There is hope because we learn more about this disease every day, and we learn better and better how to take care of ourselves, yes. But there is also hope in the understanding that we are not alone, that we are held in a love that is broader and deeper and more complex than we can imagine, a love which we can never earn, a love which we can choose to bring to the center of our lives and the center of our relationships. And so in the face of our anxiety and in the face of our hope, we pause for a moment now in quiet reflection in the presence of that love. May all beings know peace. May all beings know an end to suffering. May all beings know love. I want to take a moment before I begin my sermon to say thank you to our audiovisual and tech volunteers this morning and every day. You've heard me thank Rod Richards and his volunteers. Well, there are more and more volunteers who are volunteering to help out with this, and the glitches that happened in the service a little while ago were my fault and not theirs. They did a really good job of catching up, so thank you. And we have some volunteers, but we can always use more. We can use more helping out with making this happen. You can learn how to do it. And so I'm going to remind you about this every week for the next long while, that our congregation, even if we are apart on Sunday mornings, we still continue to do the work of the congregation, and your time and your effort are valuable to us and to our community. If you're really interested in helping out with the AV on Sunday mornings, for example, please reach out to me or to Rod, and we'll get you trained. So please think about that possibility. Last week I shared with you some reflections about covenant, and specifically about the covenant that we here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert have together. As we say in the opening paragraph, this covenant represents the promises we make to ourselves about how we will nurture and support each other within this beloved community. I say we because this document is meant to be a living thing, a guide to a set of practices that we live out every day in our community. Members, friends, staff, ministers. It's not just a static set of words written down and put away. When I am asked about our congregation and tradition, and I share that we don't have a creed or a single set of beliefs that unite us, I'm often greeted with a strange look and then asked about what is it then that brings us together? Part of my answer is that we have made agreements, promises, covenants with each other about how we will treat each other, how we will live together, and that these promises are grounded in deep love and justice. The broad strokes of the covenant that we as the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Desert share says these are the promises we make. We will be mindful of how we communicate with and about others. We will seek a respectful and constructive resolution when conflicts arise. We will enrich our own lives by celebrating the diversity within our community, and we will build our beloved community. I also shared with you a practice from the Reverend Tandy Rogers. Tandy shared that in an organization where she served, the team took one section, one part of their covenant at each meeting, and reflected together on how well they were living into that part of their promises. How were they doing? How might they better live into that piece of their covenant? I think it's a powerful practice, and you will probably notice over the next coming while that I'm adopting and adapting it as I preach. I want to reflect together through my sermons and in other places on how we're living into our covenant and how we might live into it more fully. Last week, I started a conversation with you about right relations policies and our practices. Over the coming months, you'll hear more from me and others about this, and there will be opportunities for learning and exploration together. I see that as a focus on the sections of our covenant that say we will be mindful of how we communicate with and about others and seek a respectful and constructive resolution when conflicts arise. Today, I'd like to focus on one way we might live more fully into our promise to enrich our own lives by celebrating the diversity within our community. We center a lot of our thinking and exploration as Unitarian Universalists on our 7 principles. And I want to talk to you today about the proposed 8th principle and how we as a congregation are planning to explore it over the coming months. Now, you may not have heard about the 8th principle, or you may have heard a little about it so far, but for all of us, here is the text of the proposed 8th principle. Could you put that up on the screen, please? Thank you, Carol. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. I'm going to read it aloud again, and I'll invite you to pause for a few moments after I finish reading. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Thank you, Carol. Over the next few months, our congregation will be engaged in conversations, learning, exploration, and discernment around this proposed new principle. Congregations throughout our denomination have been doing just this over the past few years, and many of them have voted to make this their eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. Our board and our diversity, inclusion, and belonging ministry team are inviting all of us into this discernment for our congregation. My goal today is to formally introduce the proposed principle to you, give you a little bit of context where it comes from, and share some beginning reflections with the hope and expectation that we will together continue to explore and examine it. And, in time, after conversation and searching, bring it to a vote for approval by the congregation as one of our guiding principles. So, where does this eighth principle come from? Well, we Unitarian Universalists remember that people in our religious traditions have been involved in the fight for racial justice in our country for a long time, even if very imperfectly. Though not unanimously, we were deeply engaged in the abolitionist movement and the fight against slavery. We championed civil rights and protested and marched along with our African-American neighbors in the 50s and 60s. I was ordained in a congregation named after the Reverend James Reeb, who was killed in Selma, Alabama, while there at the call of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Violet Liuzzo, a layperson, was also killed while answering that call. Later in the 1960s, we engaged with the Black Power movement, and this exploration led to a challenging time in our denomination, as financial reality, idealism, white-centered attitudes, and a conflict over methods of creating change brought great division in our fledgling denomination. By the 1990s, after years of institutionally avoiding issues of racism and racial injustice, we began again to grapple with the realities of our organization and our country. In 1992, and then again in 1997, our Unitarian Universalist General Assembly passed resolutions to become an anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural organization. But again, our efforts drifted, and we let funding and accountability for this work dwindle. The hiring controversies in our denomination in 2017 brought issues of race and institutional culture to the forefront again. And though not universally, we Unitarian Universalists became vocal in our support for the movement for Black Lives Matter, and the work to call fatally racist systems of policing and incarceration to account in the wake of publicity and protest around the killing of Black and brown and indigenous people by the police. So we are being called to respond to this history, this activism, these successes and failures, called to address oppression in our systems and in our hearts, in our institutions, and in ourselves. We have explored widening the circle report here and responded to it by creating our own diversity, inclusion, and belonging ministry team to envision and guide our congregation's work in this area. And now we are engaging in this work by exploring the proposed eighth principle and discerning adding it to the other 7 principles. The eighth principle is written in 2013 by Paula Cole Jones and Bruce Pollock Johnson, both African-American justice and anti-racism leaders in what was then the Unitarian Universalist Association's Joseph Priestley District, which is now part of the Central East Regional Group, as we are part of the Pacific Western region. Jones had had a growing awareness that the seven principles and the concept of beloved community, while potentially deeply connected to each other, were not necessarily paired together for many people. She saw that in many people's minds, one could hold the seven principles dearly and still not see that they called one to the work of racial justice and building the beloved community. And so she worked with Pollock Johnson and others to craft what became the proposed eighth principle. Pollock Johnson's congregation, the UU Church of the Restoration in Philadelphia, adopted it as part of their covenant in 2017, and then asked the wider Unitarian Universalist Association and its congregations to adopt it. And so congregations around our denomination have been doing just that. As we start our process of doing just that as well, I'd like to offer some reflections with hopes that we can all share and talk and think and discern together in the months ahead. First, one of the things that we are being asked to understand about our movement and our institutions is how white-centered they are. The ideas that crafted and shaped them for decades have grown out of white-centered culture and attitudes. Our ways of thinking, of governing ourselves, of making decisions, the philosophies we call on to ground our tradition and religious thinking, all of these can be seen to be centered on certain ways of thinking and being that do not come from BIPOC cultures and worldviews. This includes our current seven principles that center certain ways about thinking about fairness, justice, community relationships. It's not that they are wrong, but they're incomplete, not taking into account the experience of marginalized communities or communities outside the dominant culture. The eighth principle comes specifically out of a Black understanding of the values at the core of Unitarian Universalism. It reflects decades of experience in Unitarian Universalism and the religious lives of Black and Indigenous and other people of color in our movement. The Black Lives of UU Organizing Collective, in a statement advocating the adoption of this new principle, asks Unitarian Universalism to, quote, articulate a commitment to the dismantling of white supremacy within the stated principles of our faith. While Unitarian Universalists, they assert, have no creeds to which one must attest, our living tradition is a faith guided by principled action. As such, we wonder, they say, why the dismantling of white supremacy, as implicated in the eighth principle, has not been formally included in our covenant as Unitarian Universalists. For the organizing collective, this new principle is focused on action, not just affirmation or thinking. It calls us to act on our values in the world in a way that our other principles might not. You know, I think, for example, of the seventh principle and how passive it often feels to me. We affirm and promote the inherent web of existence of which we are a part, yes, but what are we called to do because of that knowledge? This new principle, the eighth, calls us to accountable action. Action grounded in the experience of all of our neighbors and kin, and especially in the experiences of our Black, Indigenous, and other people of color kin. What those actions will be are to be determined and will look different for each congregation and each person. I know that we have already begun to live into this call for action by the creation of our diversity, inclusion, and belonging ministry team, by working through our beloved conversations work to examine the way we do worship, the way we do religious education, the way we understand how to relate and be in right relationship with each other. What else we will do will be ours to determine collectively, but this principle demands that we continue that work. Thinking about the seventh principle brings me back to thinking about the way our principles became our principles, the story I told briefly in our Time for All Ages. we don't actually believe that our principles were given to us directly and perfectly by divine command. They didn't arrive carved on stone tablets. They were created by human beings. They have been revised by human beings many times. The seventh principle was adopted along with revised versions of the other principles in 1985, fully 24 years after our denomination was formed. And it has now been almost 36 years since that day. Our principles and sources are contained in the bylaws of our Unitarian Universalist Association. We have always understood our founding documents to be impermanent, amendable, changeable. Just recently, for example, we altered the language of our second source, removing binary, gendered language that alienated our trans and non-binary neighbors and kin, changing women and men to people. It was not a painless process, but change was called for from the experience of our co-religionists, and so it was made. We know that our principles are meant to be dynamic, to be lived into. I've had so many conversations with congregants over the years, struggling and discerning how best to live these principles out in their lives. So now we are being asked by those who have experienced our principles as inspirational, as Sarita said earlier, but also limited and incomplete. Asked to hear and understand their experience and struggle with our principles and to find ways to broaden them and focus them on the work of dismantling racism and other oppressions, the work of building the beloved community. I have heard from many BIPOC people in this congregation and in the other congregations I have served as minister or music director. I have heard from them that our principles are what bring them here and keep them inspired, but that they don't see us always living into the values of our principles, that our current principles are just not enough to build the community we call just or beloved. Those principles brought me into Unitarian Universalism as well. They spoke to me deeply, showed me a religious and ethical way different from the traditions I'd grown up in. The principles did and still do that in many ways for me. I also come with the privilege and perspective of my upbringing, my understanding of the way a just world should look and my place in it. I was pretty darn certain of myself. And along the way, year after year, I've been asked both by these principles, especially by the affirmation of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, both by these principles and by the people and situations I have encountered along the way in congregations, in classes and seminars, in community work and hospital chaplaincy, in retail work and editing work, in choirs and musical collaborations, asked to grow and learn and shift my perspective and understanding and change my ways of being and behavior because of those shifts. I have stumbled along the way lots. I've been hurt, and I've hurt people. I've had to retreat and recenter and try again. I've been able to change and grow best when I've done all of this in communities that companion me, that tell me I'm worthy even when I don't understand, that are willing to call me back in and hold me accountable. It has been unnerving and foundation shaking, and beautiful and humbling and freeing all at once, and it has led me to a deeper and more profound understanding and joy in our tradition. I share that not because this is about me. I share that because I want you to know that we are all on a journey. We each bring our experience and our strengths and our weaknesses. We bring our wounds and our hopes. This work will not be easy. It will challenge each of us. Some days it will seem futile. Other days, more and more other days, it will feel like a new world of possibility is opening up. Over the next few months, there will be many opportunities to explore the proposed eighth principle. Opportunities for sharing together, for learning together, for challenging each other together. That sharing starts today in our time after this service on Zoom. Please give me a few moments after the end of the service to log on to Zoom and then I'll join you in beginning to reflect on this new principle and our process. I hope you will open your hearts and ears to the experiences of your neighbors and kin who are BIPOC folks. Know that you can always reach out to me as well, to other leaders of the congregation. I will invite us all to be careful and think about who we share concerns with, though. Remember our covenant with each other, to treat each other with kindness and compassion, and let's avoid asking those BIPOC folks in our community to have to experience and possibly be hurt again by our struggling. Choose carefully who you share with, but please do share. On this weekend, when we honor the fierce, loving vision of justice and community brought to this world by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I hope that we can hear the call from our Black neighbors and kin, from our kin who are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, the call to a new way of centering fierce, loving action for justice. I hope you will hear this call as an invitation to bring your hearts and minds to the work of building the beloved community here together. May it be so.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, this world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
As we extinguish our chalice, please recite along with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Again, I'll invite you after Kurt shares his postlude with us to remain in the Zoom room as we chat together, begin our conversation about the eighth principle. We close our service today with these words from the Reverend Joseph Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others, may we, as people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Go in peace, my friends, to love and serve the world.